All right. Good morning and welcome to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. My name is Jennifer Chardelli and I work in our museum's Levine Institute for Holocaust Education. I'm honored to be here today to host today's first person program. Our first person today is Mr. Alex Schiffman-Shilo, and we will meet him shortly. First Person is a series of weekly conversations with survivors of the Holocaust who share with us their first-hand accounts of their experiences during this time. Each guest also serves as a volunteer at the museum. And we know that the life stories of Holocaust survivors absolutely transcend decades, and we're very grateful for the funding from the Lewis Franklin Smith Foundation and also the Arlene and Daniel Fisher Foundation, who have made this 17th season of the First Person series possible. We also thank Alex for being here today and being willing to share his account of the Holocaust with us. The museum's website, www.ushmm.org, provides information about each of the survivors who speak during our First Person series. And so anyone who's interested in keeping in touch with the museum can fill out the Stay Connected cards that you received with your program today. Or if you speak with a museum representative at the end of the program, we can help you get connected. And getting connected today means that you'll receive a digital copy of Alex's testimony. So you'll have that as a keepsake so that even after you leave here today, you can share his story with others who aren't with us this morning. Alex will share his first-person account for about 45 minutes, and if we have time at the end, we'll have an opportunity to take some questions from the audience, and then at the very end, we are going to invite you to all stay for a photograph that Joel will take with Alex in the front and everybody in the back, and it makes a really, you may have seen some of them, it makes a great photograph. To get us started today, I wanted to provide just a little bit of intro framing to help set up Alex's situation. And we begin with this portrait of Alex in his Cub Scout uniform when he was a young boy. Alex was born in Strausbourg, France in 1933, and the arrow points to where Strausbourg is, right on the border with Germany. Alex's parents emigrated from Poland. His father was a traveling salesman, and his mother was trained as a Hebrew teacher. They moved to Paris in 1938. So the family moved to France in 1924, Paris in 1938. And when the Germans invaded France in 1940, Alex's family actually moved from Paris to the south of France, where the collaborationist Vichy government was in control. Alex's family ultimately moved to Villefranche-de-Rouergue, the town where Alex's great-uncle Max lived, and we'll hear more about that. When Alex's mother fell ill in 1941, Alex's mom's younger sister, Celie, came and took care of Alex and his sister, Madeline, and we see his Aunt Celie in this photograph. Alex and his sister were able to attend school and live a relatively normal life until September of 1943 when the Germans invaded the town. Alex, Madeline, and Celie were able to escape to a nearby forest, and we'll hear a little bit more about that. After the war, Alex and his family were able to return to Paris. At the end of the war, a number of years later, Alex moved to Israel, and while there, he served for 2 years in the Israeli Defense Forces, and he went on to have a successful career as an agronomist who worked for the United Nations on international agricultural projects, which took him around the world to many different countries. Alex moved to the United States in 1989, where he continued to work on international agricultural projects, and even after retiring, Alex continued to translate documents and contribute to that field. Alex is married, he has 3 children, he has 5 grandchildren, and he volunteers at the museums on Mondays and Thursdays. And so with that, I'm going to invite Alex up to the stage, and we'll get started with our conversation. So please.
Yeah, good morning. Before we start, there are a few volunteers, quite a few volunteers who are survivors, Holocaust survivors, and we have a monthly gathering, and it happened that the monthly gathering is today. So when you go out and you go where the classrooms are, you can just peek in and you will see some of the faces you just saw on the screen.
I think it's one of the real privileges at the museum that we
Yeah.
get to interact and that you give
Sure.
your time to the museum.
Sure.
So, all right. Well,
Okay.
you ready?
Yeah.
Great. We thought it would be great to start with some memories you have of your life before the war started. So the war starts in 1939. You're born in 1933.
End of 33.
Yeah.
That means there is a gap of 6 years, something like that. I was born in Strausbourg. Strausbourg is just on the German border of France, on the eastern part of France, on the border of Germany. You just cross the river, the Rhine River, and you are in Germany. We stayed in Strasbourg until 1938. My father was a traveling salesman, and he decided that Strasbourg was too off-center to travel. It was an extra 200 miles or more to go. So we moved to Paris in 1938. But then two things happened. My mom she got breast cancer, and the war came in 1940. We moved first to a little town called Issoudun, where the manufacturers my father used to represent were located. And we stayed there not even a year, and then we moved further south to another town called Villefranche-de-Rouergue. It's about, for whoever knows where is Toulouse, it's about 60 miles north of Toulouse.
And we'll hear a little bit more of that move.
Yes, sure.
Tell us a little bit more about your father. He was born in Poland. He's a war veteran.
Yeah, my father was a war veteran. He fought, as we could say, on the wrong side, meaning on the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the poor man spent 2 years on the Russian front and 2 years in the Italian front. World War I, I should remind you, the Italians were allies with the Allies. They fought against Austria. So my father was on both. He was even wounded once, but he survived. My father was in communication, but in these days communication was telephone. And telephone implies wires. And wires imply to put wires, to lay them down, and also to repair them. And they are very easy target to snipers from the opposite side. And my father thought he was wounded, but they had many casualties.
And he survived the war.
He survived the war.
And then he moved back. He was in Poland. He moved to France.
Yes.
And when did he meet your mother? And
oh, they knew they were from the same village. You know, they knew them from almost birth, I would say. But after World War I, he went to France. Then he went back in 1924 and married my mother. They came back to France, and my sister was born in 1926. By that time, they still were Poles, and they were naturalized French, including my sister. In 1928, my sister was then 2 years old. I was already born a Frenchman, a French citizen.
And your mother, she was trained as a Hebrew teacher.
Yeah, my mother was trained as a Hebrew teacher, but she never had the opportunity to teach. And she had to help my father make a living, and she worked as a seamstress. And my sister, I was too young, but my sister told me she remembered our mother sewing, zippers and, hundreds of zippers just to make a living. She was paid by the piece, not by the hour. Yeah.
And so thinking about your life, again, before the war started in Strausbourg and then Paris, what do you remember about those days? Again, you're a young child, but did you go to school?
Strasbourg, I remember almost nothing. The only thing I know, because I went a few years ago, I have the address where we lived. The house is still there. I know that. It's 13 Rue du Renard-Préchamp. It has another name in Alsacish, but anyway. So the house is still there. This is what I remember. Then I remember coming to Paris and going to elementary school, to kindergarten, near the house, and that kindergarten also still exists. I know exactly where it is and still exists. And they told me some funny thing that for 2 or 3 months I started to speak a mixture of German and French. But the mixture was not one word of this and one word of that. The mixture was in the middle of the same word. I mean, a French beginning with a German ending. Yes.
And so in terms of, your family is Jewish, do you remember religion playing an important role? Did you go to synagogue? What was that like in your life?
From what I heard, my mother used to keep a kosher house. My sister told me that. After the war, my father couldn't care less. But he insisted after the war, about keeping kosher. On the other hand, he insisted after the war that his son, me, would go to Jewish high school to get a Jewish education. And I went to the Jewish high school near Paris. That high school still exists today. Now, one little story. Years later, in Israel, I went to the French bookstore, and here is the former director of the high school. But my first job was some job in the slaughterhouses. And I was so dirty and stinking that I didn't dare say hello. And I regret it to this day because I should have done it. But, okay, anyway.
So thinking back, war started in September of 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. But they wouldn't invade France until May of 1940. Did you have an understanding that war had started? What was that time period like in France?
The French call it, that period, they call it the funny war, la drôle de guerre, because there was a state of war and there was no fighting. But then the French had then the reputation to always prepare themselves for the previous war. So they fortified all the borders with Germany, and the German overrun went through Belgium. And that border was not guarded at all, so within 3 weeks, the French army collapsed. I remember that we went to the south, and as far as I remember, we took a taxi from Paris to Orléans, some 60 miles, and then we boarded the train south. This among the few things I remember.
And why you ended up in Issoudun for your first?
Issoudun is a small town more or less in the middle of France. We landed there because my father's manufacturers, the people he used to represent and to sell my father used to deal with leather goods, like women handbags and etc. And the manufacturers were in that town, so it was kind of natural to go there. Later on, we went further south, where an uncle of my mother lived since the end of World War I. He was the youngest. He was our Uncle Max.
What do you remember about Uncle Max?
Oh, I remember many things. He had a fur business. He used to sew furs and to sell jackets and coats and other things. In that, when he was a young man, he also worked as at the butcher's. So he made, during the war, the most delicious sausages and hams. This I remember. My Uncle Max, even before we came, lost his son during the war. His son Armand was killed fighting the Germans. And one thing I remember is one day at the end of the war, one day I came to my Uncle Max. I was a child. I just knocked at the door and come in. I came in, and I see his wife sobbing very quietly near the radio. The radio was announcing the names of the French prisoners of war who were repatriated. And the poor woman, her son, wasn't coming back. Apropos that radio, I remember something. We used, although it was forbidden, we used to listen to Radio London. It was a broadcast called The Frenchmen Speak to Frenchmen. Les Français parlent aux Français. And the indicative, I found out after the war, was, for those of you who know music, was What a Music by Handel, the opening.
Who is a German composer?
Handel. No, Handel was born in Germany, but he lived in England most of his life. And What a Music was for the British, for the British pleasure when they were on the Thames.
And to clarify, right, when the war started in France, 3/5 of France is occupied or is overtaken by the Germans, and then Vichy, the part that you moved to, it maintained its own government, but it was a collaborationist government.
Oh, yes.
And so you moved there to escape the German occupation, and still, what was daily life like? Could you feel that the war was going on? And
personally, I didn't feel it, but I know from one or two things and things that I learned later. One day I came, they started around 1942, more or less. There started to be rumors of what's happening in Eastern Europe for the Jews. And there is another thing. My grandparents sent a few letters. One letter said, the last letter said, we have to go. We are leaving, we have to go, we don't know where we are going.
And your grandparents at this point remained in Poland?
They remained in Poland. Today we know exactly what happened. They were marched to a nearby forest and they were gunned down in a common grave directly. Okay, so we knew, we learned that only after the war. But I want to say something else about do I have my Uncle Max? Forgot. We'll come back.
And were there other, when you moved, did you move, there were a few other families that you moved with? There were a few
there was my mother's elder brother moved with us. And he had a belt manufacturing business. And he succeeded to bring his machinery to Villefranche, to where we are. And he kept on going until, and this I discovered only very recently, he was forbidden. He got a letter from some authority, Vichy authority. The Jew, Wolf Fried, has no right to own a business. By that time, my uncle gave the business a kind of factice handover to a friend of his, and then he got a second letter that he has no right to work there. I gave both letters copies of to the Holocaust Museum.
And that's an example of anti-Jewish legislation that started to kind of permeate that environment. You had a story about another Polish family, a Polish-Jewish family in the town. Can you speak to?
Yeah, there were the stock across the street. We were French citizens, so somehow maybe we were protected. Although my tante Tilly was Pole, how she survived, and she never talked about that. We don't know how she kept it in the dark. But that Polish, across the street was a Polish family, Stocky family, and they had 3 sons. 2 sons were with me in the same classroom, with the same teacher, and one day they vanished. They were very poor. They were relocated to the east. The irony is that the father is known to have said that at least my children will have something to eat. I checked recently in the Holocaust Museum in Paris, in the memorial. They are on the list of families who were deported, but they didn't survive. That's what the archive says.
You mentioned your Aunt Celie. Can you talk? She arrived because your mother fell ill.
My Tante Celie was the youngest. She was a dentist by training, but she was still a Polish citizen. She came to our house to help my mother, her ailing elder sister, until one day. I know that my mother used to call her at night to help, etc. Until one day she didn't call, and my mother was gone. That was 1941, in May. Then Tsili took over. Tsili was a little bit authoritarian, I must say. And I always say jokingly, she had a lie detector here in her little finger. But we kept very close relations until she passed at age 90 and something.
Wow. You know. And what do you remember? You were quite young then when your mother passed away. Do you have memories of what that change meant?
What it meant, I have a few memories. First of all, at the very, very end, her face was kind of distorted a little bit. It was not, there was a change in her. Then she passed. The burial was in Toulouse. I did not go to the burial. And then my tante took over, and my sister was a teenager. And as much as my tante was authoritarian, my sister did not accept the authority. And my sister one day screamed at me, and she said, you know, she's not your mother. She's your tante, she's not your mother, because I went along much better. But
your sister was, what, 7 years older than you?
Yes,
so
my sister was 7 years. But they still had a very good relationship, and actually my sister became a dentist because my tante advised her to go. My tante was a dentist, and she said, go to dentistry, it's good. So my sister went.
Okay. And you, during this time, you continued to go to school?
I didn't miss one day of school. And then I cross-check. I asked my tante, the only thing I asked her, did I miss a day of school? She said no.
Wow.
No.
And can you, in this environment is quite unusual, and especially in a collaborationist government where there were neighbors or folks who turned against.
We were in a little town. The town was not, they were not against us. They were not hostile. They knew we were Jewish. Once or twice somebody was talking about me and saying, oh, le petit juif, the little Jew boy. But that was it. It stopped there. And the picture you had was myself in the Cub Scouts. You can see that the tie is as good as this tie on me in the picture. I was in Cub Scouts, and I went to summer camp, and the head counselor of the camp was from another town. And the first day, he summoned me and another Jewish boy, and he said flatly, these ones, I don't want them. And then his deputy, who was the math teacher in our school, said, they go, I go. End of story. We stayed.
And what a powerful testimony to the choice of individuals. And it actually makes me think of our Some Were Neighbors exhibition, which if people haven't had a chance to see it, this is going to sound like a shameless plug for the museum, but there is a really great exhibition that explores the role of ordinary people, and it features, people such as that, right, who we don't know the motivation for why he stood up, but he did, and it made the difference. Yeah.
Now, about my father, I want to say another thing. My father had an ID. He was a French citizen. He had an ID with a stamp Jew in it, a red stamp Juif. Okay. My father had his job. He had a family to support, and his job was to visit clients. And there was no guarantee. I understood that only after the war, only long after. There was no guarantee when he boarded his train on Monday morning that we will see him on Friday or Saturday. There was no guarantee. We knew exactly his itinerary. And at one instance, that I will link the two stories, you might have read somewhere, or somebody read, there was a rebellion of SS troops in the town where I was. The rebellion was crushed.
And that was in the summer of 43, I think.
Yeah, that in September 43. And the rebellion was crushed. There were actually soldiers from Croatia, not Germans. And they rebelled against their officer. They killed a few officers, and the rebellion was crushed. The Germans imposed curfew, and they explained, they put poster, German and French, explained the curfew. The last line said, "Don't be influenced by the British and the Jews." We saw the Jews say, better go into hiding for a couple of days. And this is what we did. We went, we passed, that's another story. How did we pass the checkpoints? But we did pass. And we took a train to three more stations further north. And we stayed there maybe a week, maybe 10 days. The problem was, my father didn't know anything about that. And the problem was that to take my father out of the train before he arrived to our town. So my sister and me went to the train station. The train arrived. There's no time to run inside the train. And but these were steam trains, and steam trains start very, very, very slowly. And suddenly, my father appears at the window. So my sister and me, we ran after the train. It was possible. And we shouted to him, go out at the next station and come back. And this is what he did.
Was that the first time you saw the presence of soldiers in your town, or were they always around? German soldiers or the Waffen-SS?
There was German soldiers, first of all, at the very, very, very beginning. And they were regular soldiers. Mm-hmm. And I remember that because I could speak a little bit of Yiddish, which is a mixture of German, I directed one of the soldiers to buy some tobacco somewhere or some cigarettes, just like this. That's I remember. Then they vanished, and they came back later. When they came back, I don't remember exactly, but they were there with the rebellion of the Croatians. Now, here's one word to add. Himmler, who was the head of the SS, valued the Muslim soldiers, Croatian soldiers. Most of the Croatians were Muslims, and he valued them, and therefore he tried to erase the whole story of the rebellion, but it was broadcasted at Radio London 2 months later.
And was that
at the BBC?
When you fled with your sister, was that when you went into the woods and you had a cousin, or was that separate?
Yes. This is when we went with my sister and my aunt and a friend of hers, a communist, an Italian communist. We went to my mother's cousin, who was living in the woods and was making a living of producing charcoal. And he lived literally in the woods. I mean, his bed was marked with a few stones. He had his mattress was leaves, and that was near a tree. We went to to a little farm just nearby.
Mm-hmm. And that's where you stayed for the few days?
We stayed there for a few days, maybe 8-10 days.
And when you returned to the town?
Everything was normal.
It was calm. And there were a couple of other times you had to stay with a science teacher, or what were...
I stayed 2 nights, my sister and me, we stayed with a science teacher. The reason, I don't know. But I know that the French police, not exactly the police, the gendarme is like the troopers. They warned Jewish families that they had instruction to round them up and to arrest them. But they warned us 1 day before. Usually they did it maybe twice, maybe more. I don't know.
Which is an interesting, right? In the story in France, sometimes people think, oh, it was the Germans who were rounding everybody up. But in fact, it was French policemen who were involved.
It was French policemen.
And you were very fortunate to be in a situation where the gendarmes gave you that warning.
Recently, only very recently, Chirac and then Hollande, the presidents of France, admitted that the roundup of the Vélodrome d'Hiver in February 42 or March 42 was only French policemen. Exclusively, they said there was not one German soldier. They just admitted it recently. Yeah.
So how did you, in June 1944, D-Day happens, the United States goes to the shores of France. How did that impact your experience?
First of all, there was a rumor from mouth to mouth, mouth to ear, I don't know exactly how to say it, that the Allies came, what we call in French le débarquement, the invasion and this happened on of course, you know it, on the 6th of June 6, 1944, and it was a rumor, which, don't forget, we were in the south of France. It's about a good 300, 400 miles from the beaches of Normandy, and there was a rumor, the Allies are coming. At the same time, there was an SS armored division who was in rest and recuperation in the south of France, and they were rushed to the front. They went across, some of them were across our town. Here and there, when they saw a nice house, they did target firing on them, target exercise on them. But beside that, they are, if you heard, maybe you heard what happened in Oradour-sur-Glane. Maybe some of you heard about that. That was a massacre by German troops in a French village in the center of France. Maybe these were part of that same division. We know they were part of that same division. Now, the sad thing is, sad. When Hitler invaded France, he re-annexed Alsace. Alsace is the province, the last province of France before you go to Germany. You have the Rhine River, you have Alsace on one side, the Black Forest on the other side in Germany. Hitler re-annexed Alsace. Alsatians therefore became German citizens. They were eligible, they were drafted into the German army. They were eligible to volunteer in the SS. Why do I tell you that? Because the people who perpetrated the massacre in Oradour-sur-Glane were Alsatians. Now, after the war, Alsace came back to France. De Gaulle, who was the first president, gave a blanket amnesty to all the Alsatians who fought in the German army, and therefore they didn't prosecute the German soldiers. The commander of that unit was a German, not an Alsatian, and he was killed later on in combat with the British.
How much during this time, 1943-44, was your family or the community aware of what was going on throughout Europe, and in particular, what was happening in the East?
Yeah, we were aware. We knew that. We knew two things. What had happened, there were rumors, maybe I told you that just before, rumors about what was happening to the Jews in Eastern Europe. And one day I came back home and I said to my parents, I said, today I spoke with my friends, I was 9 or 10, something like that. Spoke to my friends and said, these poor Jews in Eastern Europe. And my sister and my aunt said, shh, don't talk about that. Okay, so I didn't talk anymore. But my father had a map of the Russian front, and he was following the progress of the Red Army, of the Russian army on the Eastern Front.
When did you know, so then D-Day, what you just described with the shelling of the nice houses in the summer of 44, when did the war end for you? When were you aware that it was coming to, it was done?
I don't think we have a precise date besides the official day, May 8, 45. I don't know exactly. I have a relative who was killed in the liberation of Toulouse in August 44, meaning 2 months after the invasion.
And can you speak a little bit about that relative? What did you know? That was your cousin?
We know he was my mother's first cousin. He was a communist. He was born in Poland, in the same village. He went to, then it was Eretz Israel, meaning Palestine. And from Palestine, he moved. He fought in the international brigades against Franco in Spain. I'm sorry, I'm sure many of you don't know all these details. But Franco was the ruler of Spain, and he was a fascist. The word fascist, I think, comes from that. I'm not sure. It comes maybe from Italy. But he was a fascist. He ruled Spain. One good thing he did, he was not involved in World War II. It would have been natural for him to be with the Germans, because the German helped him to seize power. The German Air Force did kind of training in dive bombing in Spain during the Civil War. And Franco didn't reciprocate to that. He stayed neutral. He did not drag Spain in the war.
And your cousin, your mother's cousin?
My cousin then went to France. He was in what they call in the French underground, the French resistance, a special group which was from foreigners, and he was killed at the liberation of Toulouse.
And he received a plaque, didn't he?
There is a plaque in Toulouse where he fell. He's called Commandant Philippe, meaning the Major Philippe. That was his war name, and it's written near that, Zeev Gottesman.
Is it true? You had another family member who was involved with the resistance, who was a doctor?
Yeah. It's good that you remember these things. On my father's side, one of my cousins was Dr. Lucien Schiffman. Dr. Lucien Schiffman was in the underground, and he was an MD, medical doctor, and he was taken prisoner by the German because, according to the medical ethics, he couldn't leave wounded people, wounded patients, but the Germans wouldn't have it, and they executed him. I have on my computer, I have the notice of the family notice of his passing.
And that was just a day or two before the
and
hostilities.
That was 2 or 3 days. That was in Périgueux, and that was 2 or 3 days. He was executed, and some 10 or 12 other of his group, 1 or 2 days before Périgueux was liberated. I was in this way, he was not lucky.
And what did you come to learn after the war about other family members? The family members that you had lost, there was another uncle who had stayed in Poland?
Yeah, that was my father's youngest brother. He didn't leave Poland. He didn't leave that village. We know that he survived the war. We don't know if his family survived. He was married, had two daughters. We don't know if the wife and the daughter survived. He survived, but in 1947, 2 years after the war, he went to a Ukrainian peasant to reclaim his watch. I guess he gave his watch for food or for money or for whatever, and the peasant killed him to keep the watch. This is well documented. I mean, we know that for sure.
So at the end of the war, your family was able to move back to Paris.
Yes.
Can you speak about that?
My father moved back to Paris. After the war, my father moved back to Paris. For sentimental reason, he insisted on having his former apartment. The apartment we had before the war, because my father faithfully paid the rent. The apartment belonged to the city of Paris, and he faithfully paid the rent until August 43, when they locked the apartment and they took all the French or the German took all the furniture out. They stole everything. And my father, for sentimental reason, wanted his apartment, and ultimately he got it. But at the end of the war, my father was worn out, kind of worn out. He had to rebuild his business. The normal track would have been, before the war, you are a traveling salesman, then you settle up and you open a little store in the same branch as you were a traveling salesman. But that part of the program didn't take place, and after the war he still went on traveling, and this is how until he retired.
And immediately after, you mentioned at the beginning that when you returned to school, while you had gone to French schools, now you returned to...
I went to Jewish high school. The school still exists. And just a curiosity, I know you cannot translate jokes into another language. The school is Maimonides school, and it was 11th Street of Abundance. That was the address, 11 Rue des Abondances. So after the war, we nicknamed it École, instead of Maimonides, École des Ventres Vides, which is the school of the empty stomach, and in the street of suffering, Rue des Souffrances. But I spent there 3 years. This is where I learned the basics of the Hebrew language, and especially the grammar. Now, linked to that, many years later, I went in Tel Aviv in the French bookstore, and here, in front of me, is the headmaster of that school. I did not dare say him hello, because my first job in Israel was to work in slaughterhouses, and I was dirty and stinking and you name it. And I regret to this very day I didn't do it. I just should have said, hello, that's me, I'm sorry how I look like. It's unusual, but I didn't do it. Anyway.
So at this point, then eventually you moved to Israel, eventually you moved to the United States. Maybe, is this a good time to stop and see if our audience has some questions for you?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. We can open this to questions. And what we'll do is we have time for some questions. And then the tradition at First Person is to always give our survivor guests the final words. So we'll take questions, and then we'll actually hand it back over to Alex. He'll be the last voice we hear from today. And then we'll do the photograph and invite you folks to come up and shake his hand, ask a question if you haven't had a chance to. We have runners with microphones on either side. So if you have a question, you can just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you, and we'll go from there. So questions?
Well.
Hi, thank you for telling your story. We appreciate that, and also sorry for the losses that you've had. I would like to know, you talked about your father fighting on both sides of the World War I. Is that usual, and how did that occur?
Have to repeat the question so everyone can hear and we can get it recorded.
You want to? Okay.
For the recording. So the question is regarding Alex's father during the First World War, who fought on both sides. Was that usual?
No, it was not both sides. The Italians were allies of the French and the British. And my father fought in the Austrian army on the Eastern Front against the Russian, on the Western Front against the Italians. Yes.
Great. Other questions? We have
Other
a question in the back.
Oh, yes.
When and how did you get your experience, your expertise in agriculture?
How and when did you get your expertise in agriculture?
Well, I am a graduate from the agronomy school in Paris. In French, it's called Institut National Agronomique. It's still there, Rue Claude Bernard, not far from the Garden of Luxembourg, which is in Paris, one of a huge park in Paris. And it's still there. I'm one of the alumni. Now, I never worked in France. I worked after I completed my studies. I went to Israel, and first I joined the IDF for 2 years, and then I worked at the Ministry of Agriculture.
How did you choose that profession?
At that time, I was kind of idealist, and
At that time?
and I believed in the life in kibbutz, and agronomy was a good, agriculture was a good profession for the kibbutz. But I never lived in a kibbutz, just a few months before I went to the military.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
Yeah.
Right
Yes.
here. Oops, please just wait for the mic. Sorry, thanks.
What made you decide to move to Israel?
I was a good Zionist. I still am.
And what made you decide to move to the United States in 1989?
Decide is a great word. Anyway.
Or what led to your move?
What led me, yeah. I met my second wife in Haiti. Then we got married. I was working for the United Nations. I worked in Haiti, Nepal, Rwanda, and Jamaica. And after Jamaica, I got a job in Haiti. And then my wife said, my wife is American. And then my wife said, stop, you go to Haiti if you want, but I'm going to the United States for a doctorate degree. And this is how she landed in Washington, and I followed her at the end of my job in Haiti.
And where's your family? You have 3 children?
I have 3. We are dispersed all over the world. My son lives in Israel with 2 grandsons. My elder grandson is now in the military. My second grandson is a big name in I think in the Boy Scouts or something in Israel. My elder daughter lives in Australia, and she has 3 children. And with my second wife, we have a daughter who is an attorney in New York. Okay. That's the story.
Are there any other questions?
Here in the back. But there was a lady here who wanted also to ask a question. I'm sorry.
So we'll go to...
The lady just behind the previous... no, not you. Okay. Okay.
Okay. We'll go to the woman right here, and then we'll go to the gentleman behind.
Yeah.
What was your... I'm a bit hesitating how I should ask you. What was your mother tongue or family language that you talked at home when you were a young child? First in Strasbourg, and then in Paris and the other places in France?
And so the question is, what was your mother tongue in Strausbourg
growing
mother
up? Tongue is a bit hesitating because, I mean, of course your mother's tongue may have been Polish, but you may have...
No, my parents used to speak Yiddish among them. And maybe that was the very, very first words I ever uttered were in Yiddish. But when I was 5 or 6, we moved to Paris, and within a few months, Yiddish was gone and replaced by the French. And as I told you before, I had a mixture, and the mixture was in the same word sometimes.
And but in the family, you spoke French with your parents and your.
I spoke French. don't forget, my mother passed when I was 7. And I used to speak French to my father. He used to speak French to me, with my sister also, in fact. Yeah, we spoke French. But my father spoke perfect German, and he even told me once he came to a metro station in Paris, and he wanted to buy some tickets, and he didn't pay attention. He switched to German.
And
he told me that curiosity.
Did he speak German in Strasbourg?
I guess so, yes. I cannot know. I cannot really know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And was there a question still in the back? Great.
It kind of relates to what she said before, but how many languages do you speak currently?
So how many languages do you currently speak?
3. Broken English, as you can hear. French, which is my mother language, and Hebrew, because I lived in Israel 18 years. But French, I can tell you, sometimes if you don't practice, even if it is your mother language, you forget words. And sometimes I have to look for a word I forgot, or when somebody says something to me, I understand perfectly, and I said, oh, I forgot that word. I understand the meaning, but I forgot that word.
Great.
Yes.
And we have the gentleman in the maroon shirt.
I was wondering if you had some sort of journey of bitterness and unforgiveness that you had to work through in your story, and to forgive the people that committed these atrocities and things like that.
So is there a journey of bitterness and wrestling with how to forgive or deal with those who perpetrated these events?
I don't know, it's hard to say. The only thing I can say is a few weeks ago I went to Auschwitz. I had to see it. I wanted to see it. Before that we went of course to Krakow in Poland. I went with my son, and Krakow is a very nice city. It's a city where you still feel the influence of who was then Cardinal Wojtyla, who became Pope Paul II. And then I went to Auschwitz, and it's a hard experience. It's a very hard experience. We are a generation, today the people you meet are the generation after. Okay. I had another thing. I had a little incident, not an incident. In France, when I was a student, I went to Sweden and to Denmark hitchhiking. On the way back, hitchhiking, I wound up in the town of Cologne, Köln, in German. And I was there with my backpack at some 4 a.m., some ridiculous time. And there were 2 policemen came to me, 2 young guys, German policemen. They did their job, asking what a kind of tramp is that at 4 a.m. in the streets of the city. But I saw the color of the casquette, which is what we call in French vert de gris. Vert de gris is gray-green. And I got goosebumps at that time. But that was a long time ago. That was, I don't know, in the mid-50s, something like that. And also I had a weird feeling once. I switched once plane in Frankfurt, in Germany, coming from the United States going to Israel. And El Al has, unfortunately, special waiting rooms in most of the airports. In Orly, in the Charles de Gaulle, just the same. And that was a kind of confined room. And here was a young German security man, was there just in case something bad happens. It was a kind of weird feeling. I don't know, it's...
So thank you for the questions. In a moment, I will hand it to you so that you have the opportunity to leave us with your final thoughts. Before that, I would like to thank everybody for spending this past hour with us. A reminder that if you have a time pass, make sure it's stamped. If you have Stay Connected in order to enter the permanent exhibition, if you have a completed Stay Connected card, please hand those in. And do stick around. We will do a photo. Joel's going to come up onto the stage immediately after for our photograph. And if you have any additional questions or if you'd like to come and greet Alex personally, he'll remain on the stage and you can come see him here. So thank you very much. And Alex.
Now, the last word, I mean, every time I have another last word, but that's it. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I was in France and we traveled through a village called, a little town called Vézelay. Vézelay is a one-street town uphill, and on top of it is one of the most beautiful churches in France. It's a real jewel. It's worth the trip from Paris. It's about 2.5 hours driving. It's worth it. But this is not the subject. Coming down, I noticed an entrance to a kind of convent, to a nunnery, and there was a nice English-speaking nun inside, and outside was a sign. The sign said that in this place, 2 nuns, they gave the name, helped to rescue and to help. They helped Jewish children in 1942 and in 1944. And therefore, these nuns and that place were awarded the title of Righteous Among the Nations, which is given in these circumstances by the State of Israel. So that plaque is outside. I went to Vézelay before, but I never noticed it. Now I noticed it. And it's comforting to see that, and we will never be thankful enough to these people. Okay?
Thank you, Alex.
You're welcome.
Thank you for talking with us today.
Wow.